Okay, testing. Oh, wow. Oh, my. That's way better. Okay, so before we jump into this important topic of the rare gift of confidentiality, I would like to share with you a short clip from The Lord of the Rings.
I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
Okay, now to back up a little bit about myself. My name is Rebekah Shenk. I live in Philly with my husband Trevor and my son William, and we are actually about to move to Lancaster City in about 2 months to begin residency at Lancaster General Hospital. I've had the privilege and honor of hearing many people's stories over the course of my life, and especially so when I was a girls' mentor at Times of Peace Christian School. I was the girls' mentor for 3 years, and I would spend hours of my day and of my week just sitting and listening to girls share. And I hold all their stories very near and dear to my heart. So why am I sharing about this topic? Why did I even agree to it in the first place? The reason confidentiality is so important to me is because I struggled to share personally as a young child. It was scary, especially because I struggled with a locked heart due to the rejection and abandonment of my mother. Fact is, it takes a lot of courage to share personally. So I remember how big of a deal it was for me to feel safe in order to share, and I knew that others must feel the same way too. Part of the key for me feeling safe enough to share was to know that the people I was sharing with was confidential. Trust and confidentiality go hand in hand. You would all agree, I'm sure, that we often associate trust with people who respect and guard our stories. So while confidentiality is just one factor in being a trustworthy person, it is a very foundational one. So today, if you are wondering how you can increase the trust in your relationships, seriously reflect on whether you are a confidential person. Do you respect people and their stories? So what is it? What is confidentiality? According to the dictionary's definition, confidentiality is the state of being secret or of keeping secrets. I love how it is referred to as state of being, as that represents permanency. Just like you or I have blue or brown eyes, or we all have the need to breathe oxygen. Those are a permanent part of us. That is who we are. However, I'm not fully satisfied with the dictionary's definition that includes being a keeper of secrets, especially since we often associate secrets with the worst possible happenings or plans. Sadly, I have seen confidentiality flipped on its head in life far too often, where people tend to be confidential about the things that they should not be and not confidential about the things that they should be. We will flesh this out later, but confidentiality does not mean only keeping the darkest secrets. I want to be very clear from the very beginning that I do not believe in or encourage absolute confidentiality. So what does it mean to be a confidential person? A confidential person is someone who believes that respecting people and their stories is so integral to relationship that it becomes a part of who they are. A confidential person breathes in people's stories, and just like oxygen remains within the body, these people's stories remain protected within this person's heart. A confidential person understands that sharing people's stories apart from very selective boundaries is like taking a person's heart and smashing it against a stone wall again and again. We are not born confidential people. Fact, we may have been born with either green, blue, or brown eyes and with the need to breathe oxygen, but unfortunately, we were not born with the birthmark of confidentiality. However, good news, confidentiality can be learned, practiced, and perfected. But first, we need to recognize, we need to identify and completely eradicate confidentiality's greatest enemies, which are gossip and fear. Gossip is a serious problem everywhere. There is no distinct box for gossip. Its deadly force spreads through all cultures, all races, all religions, all ages, all genders. Do you know what gossip is? It is sweet-tasting death. How? Think about it. It feels so good hearing or sharing a juicy tidbit of information about so-and-so, yet the aftermath is death. It is the death of the possibility for confidentiality. It is the death of trust. It is the death of relationship. We need to look gossip in the face and accept it for the evil it is, regardless of how subtle or harmless it feels in the moment. Gossip is super busy. It is constantly working to destroy relationships. Gossip is super busy. It is constantly working to destroy relationships. Healthy and trusting relationships are God's intention for all of us. While you are here to specifically hear about confidentiality and missions, I need to be frank with you that being a confidential person builds on respecting people and their stories, beginning with your family, then your friends, then your church family. It begins with the people closest to you. There's no appropriate place for gossip, especially among family and church family. From my personal perspective and experience, gossip spreads like wildfire through families, both biological and church families. This then is a problem in our relating to those who are outside of one of these groups. Does this sound like a familiar scenario? As someone builds a friendship with a certain young man or young woman, they begin to share personally about their lives. Eventually, they decide to go to church. As they grow closer to the church body, they realize that other people know information about them that they had only ever shared with one individual. What does that signal to them? I know for myself, we have experienced this in my own family. We would have been what I guess you would consider outsiders coming to our church. And I think of a situation specifically with one of my siblings. They had shared some personal information with a certain individual. And then a few days later, a family member of that individual approached them and brought the same information that that my sibling had only shared with that one individual. And I remember talking to my sibling afterwards and hearing the frustration and it wasn't even necessary. And I remember hearing how it took the motivation to share in the future with this certain individual. So while this person's intention may have been innocent, it still created a breakdown of trust in their relationship. There's no excuse for gossip, even if it's in the context of family. Talking about other people's personal business and information is not excused, even if it's with other family members. The next thing I want to talk about is another way we can participate in gossip is what I call information hungry. For example, how many of you were following the Cam Haiti kidnappings? I was too. Did any of you think about how little information was shared the entire time? Did that make you super curious? Did the lack of information bother you at all, especially as it dragged on and on? Did you wish that they would have shared just a little or a few more details? I know within my own heart, I was kind of annoyed at the lack of information at a certain point. However, I didn't need more information to cry out to God for their deliverance and spiritual protection. I could well imagine the darkness they were facing, the discouragement, the fear. If I really evaluated my heart, I think I was information hungry. This brings me to another important consideration in respecting people and their stories, and that is undercover prayer requests. Prayer requests hold incredible potential for good. Prayer is our most powerful weapon in ministry. Unfortunately, gossip loves to go undercover in the form of, in the church and in ministry, in the form of harmless and innocent and even helpful prayer requests. I think it is important for us to take the camp-hating missionaries as a powerful example to the fact that we don't need to know or to share all the details of someone in need of prayer for God to work. God answered our prayers, and he miraculously delivered the missionaries. Listen to this. God can work just as incredibly through limited information in our own prayer request. As the scripture says, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless grounds. Romans 8:26. We need to be extremely careful not to allow the excuse of prayer requests to give us freedom to share personal information about someone else so that they know exactly how to pray. Far too often, this has happened in our church and in our missions. If we really care about interceding for others in prayer, we need to arrest the information-hungry mode. I'm sure we all know scenarios where prayer requests have gotten out of hand. A confidential person also reaches out for prayer, but in a safe, in a tactful, and protecting way. It's best to see if the person who's requesting prayer wants information shared or just their name mentioned as a prayer request. That is the safest way to protect their stories. If they are in a dark place, you don't need to ask permission to ask people to pray for a friend who needs prayer. But you should leave it just like that. I have a friend who really needs prayer. Please pray for them. Also, we need to be careful not to use people and their stories as trophies. And what I mean by that is that we can sometimes use the stories of the people we're working with as a way to validate ourselves or to prove that we're involved and effective. My challenge to you is to stop and think, and ask yourself before you share someone's story, are you telling a story to benefit yourself or to benefit others? Are you sharing the story to say, wow, look at God's work, look what he's done, look at how he's working in the world, or is it to make yourself feel good about yourself? Now I would like to talk about the second greatest enemy to confidentiality, and that is fear of healthy confrontation. Fear can contribute to a gossip and a breach of confidentiality when instead of reaching out to the person with a concern or unanswered question, we reach out to others to share our assumptions or suspicions. This is a huge contributor to the breakdown of trust in the people that you're trying to invest and show the love of Jesus. We need to look fear of healthy confrontation in the face and ask God's grace to help us to have those difficult conversations. Often, our assumptions are just that, or sometimes it is a real issue. However, first, go to God and pray for that person. Ask him, should I bring this up to this person? Then go directly to that person and ask them in a loving and caring way. The fruit of that approach will reap much better results than sharing our suspicions or their struggles with others. Proverbs 29 goes, argue your case with your neighbor himself, and do not reveal another's secret. So now I will take a pushback question. So what if I need advice for how to have a difficult conversation with someone, or whether I should even have the conversation in the first place? It depends. It depends on the situation, and it depends on the motivation of your heart. If your main motivation is to reach out to someone so that they can tell you exactly how to have the conversation, exactly what to say, that's probably not a good enough motivation. I believe that Matthew 18 gives us a very clear picture, a very clear example for how healthy confrontation can be had. And it gives us also an insight into how God thinks of confidentiality. Jesus says, go first to that person. Go first to that person. And if they do not hear on that initial confrontation alone, then you can include another trusted believer. So, if you do reach out to someone else, it should be a wise and confidential person. such as your parents, teacher, pastor, or even a professional counselor. Details should be as limited as much as possible to still guard the person as best as possible. You could even omit the person's name. In concluding confidentiality's greatest enemies, I would like to leave you with some takeaways. Self-evaluate. Take time to seriously reflect on whether you participate in gossip or fear in any relationship category of your life. Purpose on build on becoming a confidential person by rejecting the urge or habit to gossip. Respecting people and their stories begins with the people closest to you. Prayer requests are very powerful, even without any further information given. Do not allow gossip to enjoy its finest undercover act. Remember this Bible verse. He who goes about as a talebearer reveals secrets, but he who is trustworthy conceals the matter. And think about this. Once you break confidentiality, you have no control over where that information goes. Now I would like to talk about the significance of confidentiality. Respecting people and their stories is powerful, and confidentiality is the key to respecting those stories. Take in this incredible truth. Confidential people help stop the vicious cycle of gossip. If you are a confidential person, you are ending gossip and prohibiting its destructive force from further damage. You are fighting for healthy relationships. You have a non-negotiable trait of an excruciatingly rare phenomenon in this world, and that is a trustworthy person. If confidentiality is key to becoming a trustworthy person, let its full significance sink into your heart. And now, in thinking about the people that you care so much about, often a lot of their realities involve broken trust. A lot of their relationships have ended in broken trust. This is often their normal. But we know that it is not normal to live with people constantly breaking your trust. None of us want to contribute to this painful cycle. We do not want to be the next person to break their trust unnecessarily. Breaking people's trust through a lack of confidentiality is not normal. However, it has become too normal, even within the church. It has become too normal, even within the church. Now to share a little bit more about the significance of confidentiality and its power to change lives, I believe I'm here today because of a few confidential people that stepped into my life at a very critical time. As I had mentioned earlier, I grew up in a broken home, and while my world was still unraveling before it completely crumbled, I would have been a pretty talkative girl. I wouldn't have really struggled to express myself. I could talk about anything, anytime. However, after my mom left me and my family, after that trust was completely severed by the one person you should never have your trust broken by, I could not talk anymore. I literally could not. People would ask me, how are you, or how are you doing? And I couldn't say much. I would just be like, I'm fine, I'm good. Even if I wanted to say more, I was like someone had taken my heart and put it into a box and locked it, and I was helpless to say anything. And so I also became super sensitive to whether I could trust people or not. And I would watch people, I would listen, I would observe. And if I couldn't trust them, obviously there was nothing going to come out anyway, but it was certainly not even going to be thought of. And so I think it's important to recognize that people respond differently from broken trust. I can only speak from my experience, but when some people's trust are broken, they become hypersensitive. They can smell people who are not trustworthy. They can smell them miles and miles and miles away. So this is why it's so important to be confidential, because people will smell you. But thankfully, there were a few people, specifically women, that I could sense were trustworthy. And so when they reached out to me and sat me down and asked me questions, even though I couldn't eke out anything really, they didn't give up, and I could sense they were trustworthy. So other times when they would ask me, I was able to start sharing a little bit about my life, a little bit of information. And while it was not an overnight thing, those interactions with those trustworthy, confidential people helped start a journey of healing in my life. And I never would be here if it wasn't for those people. So it's hard enough to share with one person. It is impossible to share if you know that your story is going to be broadcasted over their entire church. I believe that confidentiality is a rare and sacrificial gift. I would like to make an analogy here. So what does the Lord of the Rings have to do with confidentiality? I don't know. Hopefully you remember that short clip I showed you in the beginning. There was a point to it. How many of you are not familiar with the Lord of the Rings? Okay. I was thinking there'd probably be some. Hopefully this encourages you to go home and read the books. However, just to give you a very short recap of what it is for those of you who are not familiar, the Lord of the Rings is a trilogy whose main character, one of its main characters, is a young hobbit named Frodo. And Frodo is given a task, the responsibility of bearing a ring of great power to the one place in the world where it can be destroyed. And this ring is very evil, and many people who have tried to bear it before turned evil themselves. And so it seemed like Frodo, for whatever reason, he had a childlike, innocent heart, was able to carry this ring without it completely destroying him right away. Although it still did affect him very much. It was a heavy burden. It was an incredible sacrifice for him to actually to be involved in this quest. And there were characters, evil characters, that wanted this ring because they knew what it was and they wanted to destroy the world. And so, thankfully, while Frodo was the only one that could carry this ring to destroy it, there was a group of people, a group of characters that they call it a fellowship, that tried to help him be successful in his quest, basically defending him to help him be successful. So that's all I'm going to share about it. Hopefully you'll go home and read the books. But hopefully you'll be able to get something from this analogy as well. So I would like to suggest that the ring of great power is like confidentiality, and you are like Frodo. Obviously, the ring of great power was evil. Confidentiality is good. However, there are some similarities. So what are the similarities of confidentiality to the ring of great power? Confidentiality is a heavy burden. Carrying people's sorrows, losses, and pain can be very heavy as well. Especially if you walk in empathy and put your feet in their shoes, it could almost be like you lost a friend, had a parent betray you, or were abused. Confidentiality is a burden that is often, not always, required to be carried alone. Confidentiality holds the power for great destruction. A breach of confidentiality is devastating, and especially if put into the wrong hands. Confidentiality requires personal sacrifice. You must deny yourself and your personal feelings in order to protect and guard people's stories. There will be tears and times when you feel like you cannot go on. Go to God and cry out for his mercy in those times. Remember the exchange between Frodo and Gandalf. I wish it need not have happened in my time. I wish the ring had never come to me, said Frodo. So do I, said Gandalf, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. We, like Frodo, can wish that what we learned about someone's story never came to us. It's just too heavy, too sad. However, Gandalf's advice is just as much for you as it was for Frodo. All we have to decide is what to do with the stories that are given to us. Sometimes you will share this burden with another. Frodo didn't successfully carry the ring all alone, all by himself. However, the one or two people that he did share with, who you will share with, will be like Sam, trustworthy and loyal. So, my challenge to you from this analogy is, let's be a little bit more like Frodo and bear the sacrificial burden of confidentiality. It might just change the course of this world. Now, I would like to talk about the solution. And specifically, how is this worked out in real time? And I want to do that through clarifications. The first clarification I want to make is that our loyalty is to God first and then to people. You should never promise anyone absolute confidentiality. The next clarification I want to make is that it's kind of going back to what I had mentioned earlier about being confidential about the wrong things. So this is very important to discuss. So what I've observed with confidentiality is that people tend to be confidential about the things that they shouldn't be and not confidential about the things that they should be. So what should you always be confidential about, even if the person you're talking to asks you not to say a word? Plans for suicide, physical or sexual abuse, an adult talking to a minor inappropriately, a possible exploitation situation, and plans to harm someone else. Now, this is the list I have. If you know of more, if you think of more, please tell me so we can add it to this list. These are some situations that merit being shared with another trusted individual who ideally is involved in the situation, or in the situation of a planned suicide, it is ideal for you to reach out to those parents or whoever's living with them so they can be on alert. And I want to make it a side note here. If you are talking to someone who's suicidal and they're saying that they do feel suicidal, and even if they've never actually came out and said, I'm suicidal, don't dismiss it or change the subject. You need to ask them directly, are you suicidal? Do you have plans to harm yourself? If they say yes, then always follow up by asking them, do you have a plan? And if they say yes, that represents a high probability that that individual will actually act out on those plans. And you should reach out immediately to the guardians or whoever's living with this person to let them know. And there's two other routes you could take too. You could either, it would be reasonable to ask the individual if they'd be willing to involuntarily admit themselves to the hospital, or in extreme situations you could throw to them, which is an involuntary admission. So, especially if that individual doesn't have anyone in their life who cares or is able to watch out for them. The next one I want to talk about is physical or sexual abuse. And I recognize this is one of the most challenging pieces to handle. However, both represent a possibility for the murder of this individual, and abuse is devastating. So if they are sharing about that they are being physically and or sexually abused, you should probably reach out to the police or Children and Youth Services. I understand this is a very controversial subject. However, it is something that we cannot take lightly. And in thinking about the missions you guys are in, and the children or the youth you're working with, if you would actually approach one of their abusers and confront them, that could cause incredible harm and even greater harm and devastation to them. So, what do you actually keep confidential? Personal life stories, personal struggles and fears, family history, struggles with relationships in their life, joys, celebrations, or surprises. And now for my final clarification, I want to talk about how to share with the Sam in your life. Sometimes you will share the burden of confidentiality with someone else for advice on how to help that person, or especially if that person is in harm's way. You don't need to share with more than a few people in order to get the necessary wisdom to move forward. People like counselors, your pastor, mentors, youth leaders, or other people involved in this individual's life. One thing to ask yourself before sharing with another trusted individual is this: am I sharing to better help the person I care about, or am I sharing just for my own sake? If you feel like the information you've received is just destroying you and you're an emotional mess, obviously you cannot help that individual without getting emotional reprieve first. Again, you should only share with very specific people who are also wise and confidential. Now, I would like to leave a final encouragement with you all. A confidential person will draw people to themselves without hardly saying a word, because a confidential person is a trustworthy person, as well as someone who cares deeply about people and their stories. There are few greater gifts that you can give or offer someone in the world than the gift of offering someone a safe place to talk, to be listened to, and to be loved. This is the rare and sacrificial gift of confidentiality. Thank you.